Hello and welcome to Robinson Hall Experts Talk. My name's Laura Saunders, Marketing and PR Manager at Robinson Hall. And today I am joined with Robert Franklin and we're going to talk about, do you know where your property boundaries are? Which is a subject that always gets lots of interest. So firstly, I'll introduce Robert. Robert is the local partner and chartered building surveyor at Robinson Hall. He has over 30 years experience working on a wide variety of demanding residential and commercial projects. Clients value his practical approach to building design and project management. He also deals with boundary disputes and other land ownership matters. Welcome, Robert.
Hello, Laura. Thanks very much for inviting me. I will do my best to cover some of the issues that you're likely to come across and address some of the general myths and misinformation surrounding boundary matters.
Great. So what are the key considerations with property boundaries?
No two properties are the same. Although there may be some similarities, you do have to treat each case on its own merits. Our own properties will probably have some kind of boundary structure that separates it from our neighbours. And we probably think that we know where the legal boundaries are. Some of the structures will be natural living things like hedges and trees. Others will be man-made features such as walls, fences and drainage ditches. But just to confuse matters, not all legal boundaries will follow physical features. Sometimes the legal boundary will be an invisible line based upon details and measurements indicated on an old plan.
So how do I find my property boundaries?
Under the current conveyance system, since around the 1980s, each time a property is sold, the Land Registry will have produced what's known as a title plan and a title register. Anyone can purchase these, they're available on the public register, and they're a very good, useful tool and a starting point.
So title plans show the property's true boundary?
Well, that's not always the case, and there's an awful lot of confusion here. On so many occasions, people come to me waving their title plan, showing that the boundary on the ground doesn't match their plan. And they often think that they own a metre or several feet beyond where the current fence is. But this isn't quite right. What everyone has to be aware of is that the Land Registry plans don't really play any part in deciding where the boundaries are located.
Right.
The majority of title deeds these days tend to be based upon the Ordnance Survey maps. And of course, they only depend upon the information that's given to them at the time, from a solicitor from the time that they're sold. So you really have to treat the title plans with an air of caution.
So what do the Ordnance Survey maps show?
Their maps are basically topographical maps. They will show the physical features that exist on the ground at the time that they were surveyed. Sometimes the information would be recent, often following bypasses or following major infrastructure projects. They'll have been rephotographed and surveyed much more recently. But some editions of the maps go right back to the 1970s.
Gosh.
So you can appreciate sometimes that you do have to treat any information that you find with a certain element of caution, certainly until you can establish how relevant it might be.
So I think you can be confident to say that they aren't a true representation of your property boundary.
That's right, and in fact Ordnance Survey and the Land Registry always include a disclaimer that their maps never show the true legal property boundaries, nor do they show the ownership of any features that might exist around your property. Although some property boundaries may match with surveyed map features such as a hedge or a fence, you shouldn't make any assumptions. And one of the big takeaway points from our discussion is that their plans only show what's referred to as the general boundaries, and it's not possible to be sure of this position of a legal property boundary from any Land Registry title deed or an Ordnance Survey based plan. So If you are looking at these maps, please don't go waving it at your neighbour, thinking it's the legal basis for agreeing the boundary. Yes, it's a very good starting point, but it's not always as accurate as people think, and certainly not the correct basis for agreeing a dispute.
Where should property owners start when looking into their boundaries then?
In the early stages, it's all about the investigation and research, and really establishing what information and evidence you can find and what might exist out there. In my opinion, one of the most important aspects is to sort of work out where your current physical boundaries are and how long these have been in place. But again, remember, things can change on the ground, so any information and evidence needs to be interpreted by a professional surveyor.
So if I'm a property owner and I'm still a little bit unsure about my boundaries, it sounds like title plans and ordnance survey plans are just there for a bit of a guide but shouldn't be taken literally. It sounds like with any kind of disputes, or even if you're not in a dispute and you want to know what your property boundary is exactly, it would be best to seek professional advice. But there's a bit of a myth going on with boundary fences and your boundary, particularly when you're looking kind of at your exterior. So which boundary fence is the property owner's responsibility?
This often comes to a head after a large storm when you get many fences are blown over. Both parties are often quite quick to deny responsibility that it's their fence, and this is when you really need two neighbours to talk to each other to understand perhaps who originally put up the fence, whether it was someone in their property or whether it was a previous neighbour in the neighbour's property. Ultimately, if you want to know whose responsibility it is, certainly the first method that you'd do is you'd go to the title deeds. If you check your title deeds, sometimes the plan may have what's known as a T mark, and
I see.
And these are so it's the letter T, and it will usually point inwards towards the property to show that they have the liability to maintain and repair it. Whether it's a wall or a fence, very often a T mark on the plan is a very good indicator that that's the responsibility for that owner. But if there's nothing shown on the plan, don't worry. You can also check the title register, because sometimes it's in the text that's in the title register. So it's always worth reading through to see if that sort of throws up any information, or and if it's not in your deeds, purchase the neighbour's title deeds. They're available in the public register, so you can check to see if there's any old references to previous fencing obligations, or if any of those repairing liabilities exist on either of the properties in the vicinity. So one of the biggest myths that people I often come across is when people think that there's a sort of a system where you always own the rear fence on the left of your property, and that sort of follows through with everyone up and down the road. But that really isn't true, and it is one of the biggest myths that you need to sort of be aware that it's not always the case. I think you've always got to check your title plans and check your title deeds in the first instance.
I think it's fair to say as well, we're kind of obviously giving guidance, but if you do instruct a professional firm such as ourselves, we can do this all for you. As Robert said, the plans and the deeds are available. So if you're kind of, at a very sticky point, and particularly if you've got a dispute with your neighbour and you just don't know where to start, obviously we're giving you some guidance so that you can do a bit of homework before you possibly contact us. But I think with anything, it's always worth getting us on board as soon as you possibly can, and then we can kind of take the pressure off you.
I think that's very true. There's an awful lot of information out there. Some of it, you'll know where to find quite easily, and other bits, give us a ring. We can give you a bit of a steer, and certainly give you an idea of where to look before perhaps we get fully involved.
So you've touched on title plans previously, but what exactly is a title plan then?
It's a good question. It's a map that's produced by Land Registry, It includes the property in question edged red, and it's more than often based on an ordnance survey plan. These are created electronically now. However, for very old properties, they may also still be provided or exist in paper form. The title plans will also typically show if any rights of way exist, or possibly if there's any other specific information which affects the property. So everyone needs to be aware that ordnance survey plans, they capture the information using aerial photography. So they're not going to be able to confirm specific details, especially when sometimes boundaries are covered by large trees, or if two boundary features are located very close together. They were never really intended as a basis for identifying that level of detail on the ground, and certainly not for resolving disputes.
A piece of land. So if I'm listening and possibly I've started having a dispute with my neighbour about the boundaries, what are my next steps?
As I alluded to before, I think most disputes can be resolved by gathering simple, relevant evidence. At the end of the day, it is all down to the strength of your evidence versus the strength of your neighbour's evidence. So certainly, if you think that you're in the right and it's worth pursuing, it is always important to research and obtain as much history about the boundary in question as you can. You might start with obtaining the current title plans, but also check to see if any old historical conveyances exist. These might be sitting in your own archives, or they might be sitting in the archives of your solicitor's office. So that's certainly an avenue worth pursuing. I find very, very often that photographs can be extremely helpful. Sometimes it's the most random family garden party that will certainly highlight if a fence existed at a certain point of time in a certain place. So it is worthwhile checking those family albums just to see if there might be some useful information lurking there. And along those lines, you can purchase some aerial photography. There's a certain amount available free of charge on some of the public platforms, but you can pay for some scaled historical aerial photography, which again can sometimes just prove that a certain feature may have existed at a certain time, and it's in the place where you're looking to try and substantiate a certain claim.
So once all the evidence has been collated, whether it's by yourself or the professional, what's next?
As we sort of suggested before, there comes a certain time and a place when you need professional advice, and we're professional surveyors. We know how to interpret some of the evidence, but we'd also recommend that you obtain suitable legal advice as well. So don't talk to your conveyancing solicitor. You want to talk to a solicitor that's experienced in litigation matters, because between us all, we'll certainly be able to describe and ascertain what's going to be the most, the strength of your evidence is the key, and making sure that that you can depend upon that evidence is very, very important. So, sometimes you can approach your neighbour. Sometimes your neighbour is minded to cooperate with you, which is great. You can have a cup of tea over the fence and try and sort of iron things out as amicably as possible. Sometimes, your neighbour sticks his head in the sand, just wants to correspond via letter or email, which is very, very frustrating. And of course, you might be in the wrong. Again, going back to what we said before, try and seek that early advice, and we can certainly give you an idea as to whether we think that you're right to pursue the thought process and the avenue that you're pursuing.
So once they've obviously sought our advice, and we can obviously do the research for them, would there be any surveys required, or how would we establish the proper boundaries?
Well, I would always recommend a GPS survey is carried out. This is one of these, using satellite technology, which pinpoints and measures the exact location of all of your fences and trees, hedges, whatever the boundary might be, all of the pertinent features. Because very often your historical title plans and ordnance survey plans, they'll show things to a certain scale and to a certain indication, but they're not to be relied upon. So This is when we rely upon a more detailed and accurate GPS survey, and that gives everyone the confidence that the features on the ground are accurately shown on a plan that we can all depend upon.
So we're at the stage where we've sought advice, we've done our research, and we have boundaries that we believe are correct. What are the options then?
You could reach an amicable agreement with your neighbour, write it down on the side of A4, both sign it, countersign it, and date it, and that might just sit quite happily in both of your archives, and that might suffice. If the matter is particularly more contentious, I'd always advise that a solicitor gets involved, because a more formal document might be needed, and that can be attached. The solicitor can go to submit that to the land registry, and it can be used as a formal document to attach it to your own title deeds.
Okay.
That way, it's never lost, and it's recorded for its entirety. Sometimes you'll find instructing Robinson and Hall to act as your own expert surveyor, and together with your legal team, if you get that done at an early stage, we can understand how all the evidence fits together and guide you on your chances of success. We often get appointed as expert witnesses to provide we provide an impartial professional opinion. So we're there to try and base our opinion on facts, and that's when the GPS survey comes in. That's when reviewing your historical photographs and historical plans, all of that comes into play, and we try and provide our professional opinion at an early stage, or whatever stage you decide to instruct us.
What happens if, after all this, there is still a disagreement?
If you still can't agree, there are various other methods, such as mediation. There's alternative dispute resolution. There's both solicitors and the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, who's our sort of governing body. They both have sort of mediation schemes which try and encourage both parties to come to the table and talk. It's both parties do need to be aware that they can't just keep sticking their heads in the sand, and if the matters do progress towards litigation and it's deemed that one party has been ignoring the other party and has resisted all of these other avenues, so a word of warning is that the courts certainly frown on any party that's deliberately awkward or refuses to engage on matters, because the judges like cooperation. They want to see that the parties have actually done their best to cooperate, talk to each other, try and agree something. And if they really can't agree, then that's when the professional surveyors come in. Sometimes there might be a surveyor on both sides. There might be a solicitor on both sides, but it's all about trying to narrow the points of disagreement. And it's ultimately you try and cooperate, but if it's heading down the litigation route, then you're into quite a few tens of thousands of pounds, I'm afraid. So it is always advisable to try and seek that early advice and make sure that you try and communicate with the neighbour for as long as possible.
Yeah, I think I can imagine everyone would want to avoid a hefty bill at the end of it, especially when really property boundaries are property boundaries. People can't decide to choose them as and when they wish. So I think the idea is to try and avoid going down the court route, but if unfortunately you're in that predicament, then obviously we can help you from start to finish.
That's right.
Our service doesn't stop when suddenly you're going to court. We have that expertise as well, which is good. So we've talked a lot and covered a lot of ground today. As I think it's fair to say, if you have any questions, obviously please reach out to Robert Franklin. Just to kind of summarise then, what are the key takeaways of today in regards to property boundaries and whether you've got a dispute with your neighbour?
I think check the information that you've got to hand first. Check your land registry title plans. Check your land registry title deeds. Look to see what information they contain. They've got an awful lot of useful information, but do remember their limitations, and that there won't be the be all and end all. If it's appropriate, invest in an up-to-date GPS plan. We can help you with the survey. That certainly gives everyone a bit of confidence as to where the current features are in the ground. And you may be surprised at how they've evolved and how sometimes things look completely different to where you think they are on the ground and to where they are on paper. So remember, the Land Registry doesn't get involved in resolving disputes. You have to go and instruct your own surveyor and professional team, including solicitors. It's only the judge in a court of law who has the power to settle a boundary dispute, but we want to try and avoid you getting that stage and spending tens of thousands of pounds of unnecessary money if you don't have to. At the end of the day, no one likes to be embroiled in a boundary dispute. They can be so time consuming, cause an awful lot of anxiety, and if you can help it, you don't really want to fall out with a neighbour because you still want to live next door to them. So we regularly deal with numerous boundary disputes, and we do see sometimes how relatively small matters can easily escalate and spiral into heated arguments when no one really wants to back down. That's when we always advocate sort of good communication. Try and resolve things amicably and swiftly if you can, however much you have to bite your tongue sometimes. But if communication has broken down, it's all about employing the right professional team to try and make some headway and try and sort of make sure that it protects your interests, protects your assets, and make sure that we try and resolve things as swiftly as possible.
Great, thank you, Robert. Thank you so much for your time today. As I've said, we've covered quite a lot. If you have any questions for Robert, his contact details can be found on our website. The best place to look for them is the Meet the Team page. We also have a page about property boundaries if you wanted to have a look at that on our website as well. Feel free to give Robert a call or drop him an email, and he will obviously give you a call back or talk you through your projects and your disputes. Thank you for listening today. I have launched a series of podcasts recently. I've got plenty more to come. Have a look at them. They're available on our website and all the popular podcast channels. And hopefully you will tune in again. Many thanks. Goodbye.